Welcome to the ballroom of the Hilton Hotel in downtown Hartford for a debate between the gubernatorial candidates, Governor Dannel P. Malloy and Tom Foley. This is sponsored by the Connecticut Broadcasters Association. You know, 2014 will be remembered as a year in which two candidates for statewide office pledged to run an entirely positive campaign. Unfortunately, that happened in Montana. It doesn't really affect what we're doing here today. I want you to meet instead the journalists who will be asking the questions today in the order in which they will be asking the questions. So meet our broadcast journalist starting from Fox 61, Jen Bernstein, from Connecticut Radio Network, Steve Kochko, from News 8, Mark Davis, from NBC Connecticut, Keisha Grant, and from WFSB, Dennis House. Let me explain the rules of the debate. Each reporter will ask a question. Candidates will have 2 minutes each to respond. There will be an opportunity for a 1-minute rebuttal by both candidates. I may ask final questions to round out the hour. At that point, the format may be altered to allow each candidate equal but reduced time to answer remaining questions in the time available. Each candidate will have an opportunity for a closing statement. Please, you in the crowd, hold all clapping, shouting, barking till the final moment of the debate, to the end of the hour. It's 58 minutes. There's no breaks. There has been a coin toss to determine the order. Governor Malloy will answer the first question, which will be asked by Jen Bernstein.
Governor Malloy, the state's pension system is said to be one of the most underfunded in the United States. As of this week, it holds about $26 billion. This question is about the unfunded liability in the future. What would your long-term plans be for helping boost the state's pension fund for future retirees?
Well, Jen, I will answer the question, but let me first acknowledge my wife of 32 years, Kathy Malloy, who's here with me, my oldest son, Dannel, and the best lieutenant governor you could have in the world, Nancy Wyman. The issue of pensions is a dynamic one, extremely important, and one that we've been working on literally from day one. I'll give you a statistic. We have gone from funding that pension at the rate of $646 million a year to $1,101 million. That's how you play catch up. That's how you make sure you are putting yourself on a road to recovery. When I became governor, the pension system was the worst funded pension in the nation at 42%. We're making rapid progress, and just this last year on our total investments, that pension plan had a return of 15.5%. But what we also needed to do was to change some of the rules, and we did that at a negotiating table with the unions to make sure that we could have an agreement to build a sustainable pension system, and that's what we've done. But we even went beyond that because there's other costs that are associated with post-employment. That's really health care. When I became governor of the state of Connecticut, the only employees contributing to OPEB or other post-employment benefits were people who had been hired after 2009. As I stand here today, every state employee is contributing into that plan. Doing that simply helped us save over $12 billion in total savings, actually with respect to pension and and OPEB, closer to $25 billion. But total savings of about $12 billion when we reaccounted for appropriate return rates. I'm very happy with the progress that we've made with the state employees at the bargaining table to produce a system that is far more sustainable, will get us to 85% funding, and shortly thereafter to 100% funding.
All right, Candidate Foley, you have the floor.
I also would like to acknowledge my wife here, Leslie, and my running mate, Heather Summers. And I want to thank the Connecticut Broadcasting Association for hosting this debate. Jen, there are two ways to handle a pension liability that's looming before us, as ours is. We have the highest debt per capita of any state in the country, and we simply must do something about that. It's an obligation that looms out there and discourages people, particularly employers, from investing here in Connecticut. But there are two ways to solve the problem. One is you can tax everybody, as this governor has done, the largest tax increase in the state history, and slow down the economy and make those obligations look like an even bigger obligation in the future because our economy is shrinking, which it has under Governor Malloy. Or you can have a pro-growth plan, which is what Heather and I are proposing for Connecticut. We'll cut taxes. We'll get control over spending, which this governor has not even tried to do. Spending's gone up 16% or over $3 billion while Governor Malloy's been in office. So we simply have to get control over spending. And then we have to stop the anti-business policies that are driving jobs out of this state. We have to send a signal to the business community, particularly small businesses and job creators, that they're welcome here, that we want them to invest and plan their futures here in Connecticut and create jobs. If we do that and we get the growth rate up in our economy, these liabilities start to look much, much smaller in terms of the GDP of the state. That's what Heather Summers and I will do when we're running the state. And I think the governor's plan simply won't work, because if you just continue to tax people and slow down the economy, you're never going to generate the type of revenue that's going to be needed to meet these obligations.
Governor Malloy, you have a minute of rebuttal.
Well, I want to talk about debt. In Connecticut, we expend a lot of money building great schools. That's a big portion of our debt. If we're going to stop building schools, then I suppose we could roll back our debt very extensively. By the way, our debt is not actually the largest per capita in the nation. On a statewide basis, it is, but 47 states have county debt as well, and we don't have that. And most states don't take on the education obligation, and we do that. So there's a difference there, and it's an important difference, because we are building great educational institutions, great buildings for higher learning as well in our state. But, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can't say we're supposed to properly fund the pension and then not put the money aside. So as I've indicated to you, we've increased funding into the pension plan to get it to 85% and then to 100%. But to do that, we had to increase that funding by $455 million out of the operating budget. Tom attacks us for increasing spending on a statewide basis. But would he cut schools? Because we're funding them to a greater extent as well.
Mr. Foley, you have another minute to speak to Jen Bernstein's question, which was about the funding of pensions.
Well, Governor Malloy can't seem to distinguish between what he wants to be true and what actually is true. These are serious looming liabilities for the state. They're liabilities that the state must figure out a way to fund and satisfy. But I don't think we're going to do it the way he's approaching it. Governor Malloy was recently named the worst governor in the United States of America by a prominent national journal. And I think the fact that he's allowed these obligations to pile up, and they're continuing to pile up as he continues to let spending grow, is an independent opinion of somebody outside that probably reflects on his job performance.
The next question will be asked by Steve Kochko. It will be asked first of Mr. Foley.
Mr. Foley, you've spoken many times about the initiatives that you take as governor on the budget, job growth, education, and other issues. But as you know, the General Assembly passes legislation. With the exception of a few years in the mid-'80s, that legislature has been controlled by the Democrats. Most people think the odds are that'll continue. So if you must deal with a Democratic legislature, can you tell us how you would handle that challenge to ensure that your initiatives are approved?
Yes. Listen, when Heather and I are elected, I think we're going to have a strong mandate for change. I think the voters are going to choose to not continue what we've been doing for 3.5 years under Governor Malloy. It simply hasn't worked. And they're going to want to be heading a new direction. And I think when that happens, we're going to pick up additional seats in the House and in the Senate. So I think the legislature will be more balanced. And, as you know, members of the legislature have their own elections to look forward to, and I don't think they're going to want to be out of sync with the voters' expression of an interest in change. So I expect to get support in the legislature, and we'll get support even from many Democrats, because I think fiscally prudent policies are supported by many Democrats in the legislature. So we have a plan. We have a vision of a place where we think Connecticut needs to get to. We're not getting there under Governor Malloy. He doesn't have a plan. I don't know where he wants the state to go, but whatever it is, he doesn't have a plan to get there. And when we have a destination and we have a roadmap for getting there and we can show people what it's going to take, I think the legislature, enough members of the legislature will go along that we can pass the legislation we need to and get the state headed in a better direction.
Governor Malloy, you have 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, we had Republican governors for 16 years in this state. Remember John Rowland? He was elected to 3 terms. Tom Foley supported him for those positions. You probably remember Mr. Rowland's first promise as a Republican governor, that he was going to repeal the income tax. How did that work out? The reality is that he raised taxes time and time and time again. But what he also did was enter into long-term transactions without actually funding them. In many cases, the obligation to fund those pensions and those other post-employment benefits actually fell to me, to this administration. And then, of course, Tom will criticize us because we're honoring those commitments. But I think we have to honor our legal obligations. I also want to point out that in the years immediately before my coming into office, both governors before me raised taxes by over $1.8 billion. But they didn't do the hard work of shrinking the size of government, of improving education, of investing appropriately in transportation infrastructure, things that we have absolutely done over the last 4 years. You can have empty promises. We've had them before. But when we're doing what we're doing now, creating jobs at an unprecedented rate in the private sector, continuing the issue of making government more accountable to people, investing in long-term obligations such as paying our pensions obligations down, but also standing alongside of great companies like United Technologies, as they will begin constructing more jet engines in the state of Connecticut in just 22 months than at any time since the early 1980s. This is a record we can build on in the next 4 years. We have much to do in the improvement of education, of higher education as well, and to make sure that we're properly investing in our infrastructure. Smart investments in bridges and roads, in transit systems and bus systems. This is what the future needs to be about.
Mr. Foley, 1 minute.
Boy, I'll tell you, the biggest empty promise we've heard, Governor, is your promise not to raise taxes before you were elected in 2010, and then you put the largest tax increase in Connecticut history on the citizens. Absolutely shameful. It slowed down the economy. It's cost people jobs. We've lost 3,600 jobs in August alone. I'd like you to explain to those 3,600 people why you did that. Here we go again, blaming your predecessors. Sir, you've been in the job for 3.5 years. When are you going to take some responsibility for the fact that your policies have not worked? We have the lowest growth rate of any state in the country. And as I said, you were recently rated the worst governor in the United States of America. It's time for you to take responsibility, maybe admit that some of the things you did weren't the right things, and they haven't worked out. And maybe tell people what you're going to do in a second term. Maybe somebody would believe that actually you're going to head in a direction that might work for Connecticut. But we haven't heard that plan yet. We're looking forward to it.
Governor Malloy, 1 minute.
Tom, the publication you're talking about is a right-wing teabag organization. You know it. I let you repeat the same story twice. Why don't you tell the whole story when you tell stories? This idea that our economy is growing slower than any other state is simply not true. We're growing about the mid-rate of all of the 50 states in the nation. That's what we're doing in this state. But I also want to point something else out to you, Tom, and I brought an article by Keith Fanoff, wherein he repeats what I said on that day, which you distort on a regular basis. The reality is that I said that raising taxes would be the last thing I would do, and that I would not cut the safety net. And I have not cut the safety net, and raising taxes was the last thing I did do. Tom Foley said he would cut a $3.6 billion deficit by reducing spending by $2 billion. That $2 billion would have cost this state 36,000 jobs.
Thank you. Mark Davis from News 8, you're up next. Your question will go at first to Governor Malloy.
Well, gentlemen, you seem to be talking around taxes, so let's see if we can't get you to really answer a question, because we don't want to talk about what happened the last time. We want to talk about what's going to happen. Tom Foley, you have proposed cutting the sales tax by 0.5 point. By my calculations, if I buy something that costs $100, that'll save me 50 cents. You've talked about cutting the property tax on automobiles for some people in the cities. That doesn't affect everybody. I expect you to address that when it's your turn. But Governor Malloy, he likes to bring up the fact that you brought up this huge tax increase at the beginning of your term. You feel you had to do it. Now things are all rosy, according to you. We've got a approximately $250 million surplus in the year that just ended. Last April, you said you could do nothing but cut taxes in your next term, but so far you've made no promise and no proposal on cutting taxes in your second term. Why not?
Let me respectfully correct you. We have cut taxes.
No, I'm talking about
since 2011.
Next term.
And
I know you cut the taxes on the on non-prescription drugs. I'm talking about the future. That's what we're talking about in the next election.
And so what we'll do is what we've always done while I've been governor, and that is to take a good, long, hard look at the budget and cut taxes where they are appropriate. We're a couple of months into the current budget year. We are already working on next year's budget, a budget that will not raise taxes, I can promise you that, and will stay within the parameters under my administration where we have not increased spending by more than 2.8% per year. That's about half the rate of my predecessors with respect to their increases on a yearly basis. I'm hopeful that in these early numbers, the first 3 months of the fiscal year we're currently in, we're seeing some pretty good numbers with respect to various tax monies coming into the state. I am hopeful that we will again be cutting taxes, but it wasn't just over-the-counter drugs. We're also reinstating the $50 deductible for clothing in this budget. We've also eliminated an energy tax. We also canceled borrowings that would have led to even more energy taxes being levied, and that was arranged by my predecessor's administration. I canceled that in my administration. This issue of tax fairness is important. That's why I signed the legislation that began the process of looking at all of our taxes to make sure that we have a tax system that allows us to compete. I'll point something out to you. We have the lowest effective corporate tax, second lowest in America. I'm proud of that, and that's what's allowing us to attract jobs from out of state, including insurance companies for the first time in a long time moving to our state.
Mr. Foley, unfortunately, Mark Davis's question used up all your time. No, I'm kidding.
Mark's kind of like that.
You do have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mark, good question. I'm glad you asked it. First of all, Governor Malloy is talking about reducing taxes that he actually put on after he was elected governor. I think restoring the deductible for clothing. I think that was something he took away. He also offered a $55 tax rebate, if you recall, and then had to pull that back too. So very vague on what he'll do in a second term. I want to be very specific. I'm going to take a 0.5% off the sales tax. I am going to reduce the car tax in the cities, and that doesn't apply to everybody. But the car tax isn't unfair everywhere in Connecticut, and it isn't nearly as high in most towns in Connecticut as it is in our cities. In Hartford, I'm going to reduce it 60%. That'll be an average of about $400 for the average car in Hartford. And I'll reduce it 28% in Bridgeport and about 25% in New Haven. And that will result in the savings of about $100 per year for anybody who owns a typical car in one of those cities. Now, I also have talked about getting rid of the business entity tax. And I'm talking about comprehensive tax reform once we've gotten control of spending and we've made these initial tax cuts. Now, the reason for the tax cuts is that's what you have to do to get this economy going and unburden families that are paying the penalty of Governor Malloy's tax increases. People are telling me all over the state that they are suffering from the cost that this governor has put on their household budgets. And some of them believe they can't afford to live in Connecticut anymore. 49% of the people, as you know, have said that they think their prospects would be better somewhere else. And some of those people feel they simply can't afford to live here anymore. This governor has driven up everybody's costs, partly with his tax policy. So I would like to provide that relief. We'll get the economy growing, and then we can talk about more comprehensive tax reform to stop driving people and jobs out of Connecticut.
Governor Malloy, you have 1 minute.
So I'd rather spend some time saying how we've spent money. We have improved education. Graduation rates are up in Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford. We have spent money supporting police. Crime is at its lowest in 40 years. Homicides dropped 32% last year. Why did all of those good things happen in cities and in communities? Because we sent money to the communities to get the job done. You know, we're building a different Connecticut, one where kids can grow up expecting to get a great education and, yes, a good job. 60,000 private sector jobs having been created in Connecticut is a good start. But we will not be done until every person who wants a job, a full-time job with good benefits, gets one.
Mr. Foley, 1 minute.
Yeah, well, the governor is talking about things he's done and spending money. He talks about the crime rate coming down, but we still have 3 of the top 6 cities under a population of 200,000 with the highest crime rates in this country. And New London was just added to the list of the cities, the top 30 cities with the highest crime rates in in the United States. I was just in Bridgeport yesterday, and I was asking a large employer there in the city what the challenges are to creating jobs in the city. And the number one thing he mentioned was crime. And whether it's the perception of crime or real crime doesn't matter, but crime is a problem in Connecticut cities. And I think for the governor to be saying that crime isn't a problem doesn't recognize the reality that people and others are experiencing in our cities. It's a problem.
The next question will be asked by Keisha Grant from NBC Connecticut. It will go first to Mr. Foley.
Mr. Foley, this race has become quite negative, quite personal, one of the most personal races that we've seen in quite some time. The Malloy campaign has made much of your record at TB Woods and the Bibb Company. They point to these as proof that you're not a good businessman. So my question to you is, what would you say to those attacks? What do you say to those attacks? And are there any companies that you would say you have glowing records running?
Yeah, absolutely. Those. The governor's simply not telling the truth, and I've repeatedly told the story of both of those companies. I increased the size of the Bibb Company by over 3,000 employees. We improved benefits for the people when they were there, and when I handed over to the company to new management, it was in much better shape than when I bought it. Now, the governor is trying to talk about things that happened to a part of that company long after I left, and he's making false claims about having taken white people's benefits, which I never did. With TB Woods, I had a fine record there, too. Very proud of the record I had at TB Woods. Same story, increased employment, much healthier and larger company when I left. So people who know my business record would understand why I'm proud of it, and I'm happy to defend it. Listen, I think negative attacks reflect the personality of the candidate. And what people will and won't do, I think, tells you something about the values and principles and underlying personality and temperament of a candidate. I think what Governor Malloy has done here is cheapened the debate, and I think it's insulting to Connecticut voters. I offered at the last debate a truce, and I'm still offering a truce, Governor. The governor wasn't big enough to respond directly to me. He responded through, I guess, one of his aides. But, Governor, I have a contract right here with me tonight for a truce, just on personal attacks, sir, and on things that aren't true. And I don't know, well, maybe you could tell everybody here today why you're not willing to limit yourself to things that are true and things that are not personal but related to the issues that matter to Connecticut.
All right, all contracts have to be reviewed by CBA lawyers. So, Governor Malloy, you have 2 minutes.
Well, let me start with the truth. Crime is down in Bridgeport last year by 20%, the fastest reduction in crime that city has ever seen. When you're preaching that people should tell the truth, Tom, you should do it yourself. For instance, you should tell the truth about the 3,000 jobs you say you created at a company. You didn't create those jobs, Tom. You bought another company and merged it with one, and the company you bought had 3,000 jobs. You had nothing to do with creating those jobs. And that's in the history. It's in the reports. It's in the newspapers. You have spent 2 years attacking my integrity and my truthfulness. And now, because we're pushing back a little bit, you're like that bully in the play yard who wants to call a peace now because finally somebody's answering what you've said for years about me. This is what I wouldn't do and didn't do, Tom. I didn't drive a company into bankruptcy. You did. In fact, effectively, you drove that company into bankruptcy twice. The first time when you had to turn it over to the bondholders who you had defaulted on. The second time when you were on the board, still owning a portion of the company when it actually filed formal bankruptcy. You should tell the truth to the people who are watching, Tom. It's important. You have said that integrity is the most important thing. And yet, Tom, you don't like to talk about the arrests that you failed to disclose to the FBI. And somehow that's a negative thing for you to say, but you can say whatever you want about my record or my integrity or the things that I've said. I think fair is fair, Tom. You've made integrity an issue. I'm more than happy to talk about what you did to TB Woods, having a strike held over a 3-year period of time, literally destroying families. That's what you did, Tom. You're a person who is worth tens and tens of millions of dollars. You paid no income taxes 2 years in a row, Tom. People deserve to know who you are and what you are. And the reality is what has you uncomfortable right now is the better people get to know you, the less they like you.
All right, let the record show that Keisha asked this question. All right, 1 minute each, Mr. Foley.
Listen, I really don't have a response to the governor. Governor, as I said in an earlier debate, it looks like you've spent an awful lot of time looking into these things. You seem to be an expert on my background. Connecticut has some very serious problems. Some of them are problems that you caused through your tax hike and your anti-business policies. And I think that this campaign should focus on that. I don't think anybody believes that my record in business, my experience serving in government twice, once over in Iraq, in any way don't qualify me to be governor of Connecticut. We need to talk about what the future of Connecticut requires in terms of leadership, whether people want to stick with the same plan we have here, which is no plan, and the same policies that have got us where we are, or do we want to head in a new direction under new leadership with a plan who understand about how policy affects outcomes for families?
All right, Governor Malloy, one final minute on this topic.
Tom, if you had told the truth to the FBI, you wouldn't have gotten either of the jobs that you just talked about. That's the reality. Truth matters. But let's talk about what's happened in the state of Connecticut. You pretend that I created the deficit. We had Republican governors for 16 years. I inherited a state, Nancy and I inherited a state that had the largest per capita deficit in the nation and had spent every dollar in the rainy day fund. Ladies and gentlemen, as I look to you today, the reality is that there's $519 million in the rainy day fund. And there has been no deficit during the time that I've been governor. We have run year after year after year surpluses. We are good stewards. We may not be the best stewards ever, but what we are doing is building a stronger Connecticut that will, in fact, compete and win against other states.
The next question will come from Dennis House of WFSB. It will go first to Governor Malloy.
Gentlemen, I'd like to pivot and shift gears here just a moment. You both have battled disabilities in your lives. Governor, you've talked about your battle with dyslexia. Mr. Foley, you've talked about your battle with Bell's palsy. I'm wondering how these disabilities have shaped the leader you are today. Governor.
You know, I talk about growing up with severe learning disabilities at a lot of schools. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was down in Westport speaking to Eagle Hill School and speaking to the young people who had to overcome learning disabilities or fight to overcome learning disabilities. I think what it taught me was a compassion for people and the circumstances they find themselves in. Growing up with physical disabilities as well as learning disabilities was tough to do, but I always had the support of my mother and my father, my brothers and my sister, and great teachers. So there's another thing it taught me, that schools are very, very important. And the most important thing in schools are teachers, working with them, finding results, receiving education and input. I remember Mrs. Mitchell so very well, my fourth grade teacher. It was really one of the early points where I turned towards making some real progress. It was because of her. I remember Mrs. Ungamak, who tutored me in the afternoons, day after day after day after school, to try to get my skill set caught up to the other kids. I do remember going away to college, still listening to my books and recorded books for the blind, but then overcoming that necessity as well, and going on, graduating magna cum laude from Boston College and from its law school, graduating. It led me to decide to be a prosecutor in New York City, where I tried 23 cases with 22 convictions in those cases. The last 4 of those were homicides. I wanted to make that community stronger because communities are what made me stronger and helped me get through my difficulties growing up.
Mr. Foley, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, listen, I do have Bell's palsy. I've only talked about it in terms of it affecting my ability to speak clearly and to express myself, but I would not call it a battle with a disability. I have not had a battle with this. This has been very easy compared to the types of disabilities that Governor Malloy describes in his own case, and so many citizens here in Connecticut are suffering from. And I've talked about, in particular, people with mental health issues. We do not do enough in the state of Connecticut for people who have mental health issues. A lot of people who are homeless in this state are really people with mental health problems, but without a family member or the government or some other community organization to support them. Governor Malloy, speaking of people with disabilities, has run up the cost of home care for people with disabilities. And most people with disabilities, if they can live at home, with serious disabilities, if they can live at home or live independently, prefer to do that. And Governor Malloy has made that much more difficult for them to do by driving up the cost of home health care if that's what they need. So from a policy point of view, he may have a story of his own disabilities and what he's overcome, but for others with disabilities, he's made life more difficult and more expensive in Connecticut. When I'm governor, I won't do that. I will listen to the needs of the people in these communities. And I understand from my own personal experience, which I've described with a sister who has mental health issues, that the government simply needs to do more to provide support and services for many families who have these kinds of disabilities.
All right, we're on to rebuttal. Governor Malloy, you have 1 minute.
If you're talking about raising the minimum wage, something that we did under my administration, I'm very proud of it. Getting to $10.10 in a few years is very, very important. Let me say this, that no person in Connecticut should ever work 35 or 40 hours a week and still live in poverty. If you're talking about home health care aides, I believe that they deserve to earn a decent living as well. It's important that we attract people to that calling, having paid them a good living so that more people will come into it. The reality is in Connecticut that more people are staying at home and living at home. We have rolled out programs to keep the elderly at home, people with mental issues at home, people with other forms of disability at home. They're happier when they're home. That's why we're doing it, and we've done it.
Mr. Foley, you have a minute.
Well, the governor always has an excuse. He blames his predecessors. There's always some good reason why he did something. But, sir, you have harmed people in Connecticut with disabilities. And when I'm governor, those people will be one of my highest priorities. I don't really think the trade-off of the things you mentioned warrants hurting people with disabilities who really need the help and assistance of their communities and their government.
We're back to the beginning. Jen Bernstein, you will ask your question first to Mr. Foley.
Mr. Foley, the Project on Student Debt, a nonprofit focused on research and policy work, compared student debt in the nation for the years 2011 and 2012. It showed the average college debt in Connecticut to be just under $28,000 for a student who attended a four-year public or private institution. Now, if a student then goes on to grad school, it adds to that debt. Do you have ideas for student debt relief that's facing the younger generation here in Connecticut?
Well, listen, one of the reasons that we have a public school system and we have public universities was to provide initially cost-free debt to state residents and residents of communities across the country and for our public school system. But what's happened is these institutions, particularly the institutions of higher learning, have become very expensive, and it simply hasn't been possible for many states to continue to foot the whole bill. And so tuitions at UConn, for example, have risen dramatically, and I believe now the cost of educating a UConn student has recently risen over 50%. The tuition is over 50% of the cost now, so the state's paying less than 50% of the cost. But this governor, because he's failed to get control over spending, has caused those tuitions to go up. And he actually dipped into the UConn Foundation. These are private contributions that are made to keep tuitions low and to support academic programs and faculty salaries. He, I believe, misappropriated funds from there to finance a trip to a cushy ski resort in Switzerland and to take another trip over to China, and that further drives up tuitions for students at UConn. So, listen, I believe that public universities, we should try and keep tuitions low so that we don't have to run up. Then students don't even have to borrow money and incur student debt, first and foremost. But again, if you have debt in the future and your income's rising, it becomes much more affordable and less of a burden. But if the economy isn't growing and the opportunities aren't there to get jobs where your incomes can rise, which is the case we have here in Connecticut, private sector wages have actually declined here in Connecticut under Governor Malloy, then these are real debt burdens that can't be handled. I'll change that.
All right. Governor Malloy, 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen who are watching, I simply don't have enough time to answer all of the falsehoods that my opponent has just given out. So let me actually address the actual question. We are working hard at making education more affordable. Just this year, we rolled out a program for new parents to encourage them to save for their children. We'll put in $150, and when the parents put in $150 in that Chet Baby account, we'll put in another $100. We'll start you off with $250 for savings. Over 18 years, that can easily grow to over $25,000 with just regular weekly or monthly deposits. But we've gone far farther than that. What we're also talking about is refinancing debt. Many of the students that you talked about who have debt up to $28,000 are paying anywhere from 8 to 12% on that debt. We could use bonding capacity built into the UConn and Regents system to refinance that debt at rates substantially less than 6%. That's a good investment. We would do that in exchange for people staying in our state, working in our state, and contributing to our state. That's an important program. It's also why we increased the Governor Scholarship Program $2 million this last year, and why we've proposed another $10 million in the Governor Scholarship Program. These are real, concrete investments in the future of young people who have graduated, as well as in the future of people who will be going to college at some point in the future. The truth is that tuition in the public education system in Connecticut is a lot cheaper than most other states in New England. And a great way to get a 4-year degree is to do 2 years at our great community college system and then finish at UConn or Central or Southern or Eastern and Western. And we've done the things necessary to make that easy to do, far easier than it's ever been in the state of Connecticut. The ability to transfer the credits from one institution and another is something that had been worked on for 40 years before I became governor and now is in place.
We have rebuttal time. 1 minute, Mr. Foley.
Yeah, I know Jen asked a question about student debt, but I'd like to talk about our K through 12 school systems, if you don't mind, for a minute, because I think that's actually a more critical problem, because we have 100,000 young people in Connecticut now that we are not giving a decent education to. And I believe that the promise and premise of this great country of ours is fairness and opportunity. And it isn't fair if a young child isn't getting a decent education. Under Governor Malloy, the achievement gap, or the scores on the tests that measure the achievement gap, have actually declined. His education reform programs were, I think, ill-conceived to begin with. They burdened teachers and schools with extra work out of the classroom. He actually was rather unceremonious and uncourteous to teachers. And teachers are the ones who have the most impact on student outcomes. And so, we need to support teachers. We need to make sure that teachers feel that they have the government and their local communities behind them. So we need to do more for young people. That'll be a very high priority for me when I'm governor.
There'll be one final minute on this topic from Governor Malloy.
So let me talk about college. The reality is that that's what the question was about. So these are some of the investments we're making. At the University of Connecticut, we're increasing graduation in engineering by 70% so that we can be competitive for aerospace jobs. STEM overall, science, technology, math, and engineering will increase by 49%. The student population will increase by 5,000 students at the UConn campus alone. In Stanford, they'll be offering a degree in digital communications so that we can fill the jobs for a company like NBC that we got out of Philadelphia and New York and to move to Connecticut. We're now the #1 site for sports transmission of entertainment. We have ESPN with a new studio in Bristol and NBC in Stamford. We need to make sure that the companies that come to our state have the human capital to be successful. That's just what we're doing at UConn and at the Regents system. We are building better systems as we speak.
The next question will come from Steve Kochko. It will go first to Governor Malloy.
Governor Malloy, this debate has been pretty sobering up to this point, so I hope you don't mind if I ask a question about alcohol consumption. Would that be all right? Connecticut has expanded package store liquor sales to Sundays and approved longer hours as part of a modernization process. But many states have more open policies for liquor sales for consumer convenience. Would you support allowing supermarkets to sell wine in addition to the beer that's now sold? Would you support supermarket sales of hard liquor? And explain, please, why or why not.
What I have said is that we need to continue the process of modernizing our regulations. We're losing a lot of income to other states, and it's not about taxes. It's about convenience, and it's about the cost of the product. What I have pledged to do is to work with the industry, all parts of the industry, from those who manufacture alcohol to the smallest manufacturers, some of those in our state, new startup businesses, as well as the package stores, as well as the grocery stores, to devise a plan that will allow us to compete so that we're not losing sales to Massachusetts or Rhode Island or New York, particularly along the price side of the equation. I want to work with the industry. I've pledged to work with them. But I'm also, I have to tell you, people are pretty darn happy that they can buy liquor on a Sunday. I go around and people, marvel that we were able to do that after 300 years in the state of Connecticut. It is making people's lives more convenient. And I'm proud that we were able to work with the legislature to get that done. But I do think there's more work that we can do, but I am absolutely pledged to work with the industry.
Mr. Foley, 2 minutes.
Boy, Governor Malloy has a short memory. Governor, you actually tried to change the laws, which would have resulted in a lot of small liquor stores, mom-and-pop liquor stores, community-based liquor stores being driven out of business, and you were overruled by your legislature. Here's the problem with government getting involved in places where it doesn't need to be involved. We have a very complicated structure in Connecticut in our liquor industry. We have 3 tiers we have producers, we have distributors, and then we have retailers. And we have very firm laws about that. And a lot of people, including small liquor store owners, have invested in their businesses. They've gone and hired people. And in many cases, these are family businesses that have been around for decades, based on the assumption that those laws would stay in place. And this governor tried to change those laws, which would have driven those people out of business. I will support the laws, and I will support certainty and an understanding that we're not going to willy-nilly go out and change laws that affect people who've made investments, in some cases and over several generations, in businesses, and have a governor come in and willy-nilly change things because a special interest group was trying to push him to do something that was in their interest. I will defend small business people, and I will defend the business community from arbitrary decisions by political leaders that serve their interests and don't serve the interests of the citizens of Connecticut.
Bartender? Sorry. You have 1 minute, Governor Malloy.
So I'll side with the consumer. We shouldn't be paying $7 more for a half gallon of spirits in Connecticut than they are in Massachusetts. And before Tom says it, it has nothing to do with taxes. We shouldn't be paying $3 to $10 more for a bottle of wine. The rules that Tom wants to defend are rules that are driving consumers' prices higher. It is a hidden tax on consumers. But what I've said is I will work with the industry. In fact, we made a very good and strong proposal with respect to the small shop owners, with respect to their ability to move their license around the state. They decided not to take it. We dropped that aspect, but we are selling alcohol for more hours and more days, and it is better for the consumer. There are other things that we could do to help the consumer and eliminate hidden taxes.
When I spelled out the rules, I should have also said no drinking games. You have 1 minute, Mr. Foley.
Thank you. Well, Governor, listen, we have enough problems with job losses here under your governorship. We lost, as I said, 3,600 jobs in August. We lost 10,000 jobs in January of this year. I don't know how you're going to explain to all these people who don't have jobs as a result of your policies that there were good reasons behind it. We don't need any more job losses. We don't need any more policy decisions coming from your office that are going to drive people out of businesses and put small businesses at risk. So I would defend these small businesses who've made investments and built their businesses on the assumption that the laws would stay as they are. That's the promise that the government makes. And I just think you're making the wrong choice again. You're choosing for your special interests, the people who helped you get elected, instead of jobs and the citizens of the state of Connecticut.
The next question will be asked by Mark Davis, and then in all possibility, we may just all go home. But nominally, anyway, it is to you, Mr. Foley.
Well, that did turn out to be a sobering question. But in all seriousness, Tom Foley, you have said to various degrees that you don't like the gun control measures that were passed in the aftermath of the Sandy Hook shootings, although not very specific about it. The things that restrict people's abilities to have their weapons, I guess. Maybe you can say it on your own way, but anyway, the point is, those laws were passed in the aftermath of the shooting, following a great deal of personal lobbying by the family survivors of those children and the adults who were killed that day. Personal lobbying to Governor Malloy, to the Democrat and Republican leaders of the General Assembly. I was there, I covered it. It was very, very, really sobering. Do you think that your Republican leaders and the Democratic leaders and the governor were wrong to listen to those people, that they shouldn't have passed that law after all of that lobbying, personal lobbying, by those people who were hurting so much?
Listen, there's no question that when a tragedy befalls a community like what fell in Newtown, that leaders have an obligation to respond and ensure that such a tragedy can't happen again, and to take whatever measures they can to relieve the pain and loss of the families in a community like that. What I have said is that the bill that was passed took away rights, and I believe that in the cases where this bill did take away rights, and the governor said he respected those rights, but he said he was still willing to take them away, that removing those rights actually has not made Connecticut safer and would not have prevented another Newtown. And the bill contained no provisions, next to no provisions, other than forming a task force to solve the underlying cause of that tragedy, which was a mental health issue. And I talked about it earlier in the debate. But we do not do enough in this state to provide families the type of support they need when they have a family member who has a serious mental health issue, as this young man did, and has shown the propensity to be violent. So Governor Malloy, I think, passed a bill that did a lot of things that hasn't made our state any safer, and yet he had an opportunity to do things that would have made the state safer, and he missed it. What I've said is, if I had been governor, I would have had a very different response. But I would have been totally sympathetic to the needs of the people in Newtown. And I think I would have been responding better to those needs to actually have passed a bill that would have made Connecticut more safe. I think that's what most of the members of that community would want, and that's what most of the members of the larger community, the state, wants. If something like that happens, they want to make sure it can't happen again. Guess what? This bill will in no way prevent that tragedy from happening again.
So you think the Republican leaders, your leaders, were wrong?
If I'd been governor, it would have been a very different bill, and it would have addressed the underlying problems of the tragedy.
Governor Malloy, you have 2 minutes.
Sometimes I can't believe the things you say, Tom. So let's talk about the specifics. The young man who used these unbelievable weapons that could get hundreds of bullets off in just a few moments, had all the access he ever needed to mental health. His parents were wealthy. They had great insurance plans. There was nothing in his background that prevented him from getting any treatment that they or he would have wanted. What happened was that his mother built up an arsenal of weapons in their house, and they weren't under lock and key, and they were available to him. And in his mind, he justified going to a school, shooting out a door, a glass door, walking in and killing 20 babies and 6 adults. And somehow you want to pretend that it was his mental health problem that was totally responsible, and it had nothing to do with those weapons, those magazines that carried over 30 shots, which he changed and changed and changed again as he killed children. You would have people out there believe that we've done nothing to make it more difficult for that to happen. Of course we have, Tom. That's why we're no longer selling those magazines in our state. That's why we're no longer selling those weapons in our state. That's why you have to have permits for guns. It makes sense, Tom. And then you want to pretend this game or make up this game that it hasn't had an impact. Of course it's had an impact. We've already stopped a young woman who wanted to go into a store, tried to buy a gun, and we subsequently found out that she wanted to go into yet another school and shoot up that school in Connecticut. And yes, crime is down. 20% in Bridgeport, 32% statewide in homicides. Part of that is making it more difficult to get these weapons that I call weapons of mass destruction and magazines of mass destruction. You don't need them to kill a deer. They kill babies, and they did it in our state.
We're at 1 and 1 now, so Mr. Foley, you have a minute.
Yeah. Governor, you're actually wrong. Ms. Lanza, I understand, was trying to get her son into some kind of a care facility because she understood that there were risks, and she was unable to do it. And I've talked about a personal mental health issue I have in my own family, and I know from my personal experience, I think it's rather insulting for you to say as a governor of this state, when I know it isn't true, that families have access to the mental health support that they need. You're grandstanding, sir. You are grandstanding. And you know nothing about what you're talking about with respect to people with mental health issues and families that need support. As governor, it'll be a top priority for me. And you've insulted families with these kinds of problems.
There's 1 more minute.
I've not insulted families, Tom. It would have been a good idea for Mrs. Lanza not to have had those guns around her son. And that's why we've said that mental conditions are one of the things that should prevent people from buying guns. That's in the law, Tom. That's in the law. And of course, we've done so much over the last 4 years to make it easier for people to get health care. We were #1 in the nation when it came to implementation of ACA, a program that you were against. More people have access to health care in this state than have ever had it before. And I'm proud of what the Lieutenant Governor and our administration did to make that happen, including the mental health component. We have passed laws every single year that I have been governor with respect to mental health and ending bullying and making sure teachers and other professionals have the training to recognize mental health issues early on. Don't showboat this, Tom. You have your beliefs, I have mine. I will never, ever, ever repeal the gun law. Tom will.
The last question is going to be asked by me. We have a limited amount of time, so each of you will have 2 minutes to respond and then 30 seconds for rebuttal. My question is going to be about the core values, either religious, ethical, philosophical, that shape your thinking. In the next 4 years, there will be an unforeseeable moment which will oblige the governor of Connecticut to make a decision based on his values, perhaps his moral philosophy, as opposed to preset policy. To whom or what do you turn at such a time? And we'll begin with you, Governor Malloy.
Well, I turn to faith. I was raised in a Catholic and Christian tradition. I have strong beliefs, moral beliefs that are based on those traditions. I also believe in the goodness of men and women, that they will respond and do the right thing almost all the time. And certainly a population of Connecticut has done that time and time and time again, which it certainly did with respect to Sandy Hook. You know, just the other day, I took a step to make people in Connecticut safer. It was to give the authority to the Commissioner of Health, the State Commissioner of Health, to protect people from the spread of Ebola. There's an interview out there where Tom scoffed at my taking that action. Actually laughed about it and said it wasn't necessary because the nearest case was thousands of miles away. If that's Tom's management style, if that's how he would prepare for a crisis which is literally on our doorstep, then you don't want him to be the person that you have as governor making those preparations. I do things in a planned way. We start meetings about hurricanes thousands of miles away so that we can be ready and warn and rev up the troops to make sure that people don't die needlessly in our state. I turn to the best people, the best training. It's one of the reasons that we have drills in the state when we didn't have them before. Yeah, I believe in God, and I pray, and I hope that those things don't happen. But during the time that I've been governor, I've had to respond to Irene and Sandy Hook and unbelievable winter storms. And every one of those storms, we got better at it. And I'm happy that we're making that kind of progress. But we also got better at it by holding people accountable, including the utilities.
Mr. Foley, if you have to make a dire decision, what moral or philosophical values will underpin that decision?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that this question is coming as late as it is in this campaign, because I think values and principles are what leadership, and particularly in a chief executive role, is all about. For me, I'm a family-oriented person, and the thing I'm most proud about is having been a good parent and providing for my children. And I think that's When you're in a leadership position, whether you're running a company or you're running a government or you're running and responsible for a state that includes millions of citizens, I think thinking about a family and the obligations that a head of a family has to those people and the types of care and thoughtfulness that's needed as a parent is what should motivate you and help you look to guidance on policy, on being fair, and on providing a direction to go and a vision of a path forward. For example, bullying. Now, we've all talked a lot about bullying in Connecticut. If you have a child who's being bullied, you have an impulse about that, and you have a reaction to that that's very obvious to anyone. And I would never bully anyone as a governor in Connecticut, but this governor has bullied teachers. I don't know what the difference is between bullying and the negative ads you're running, sir, which are untruthful, irresponsible for a public leader to be saying untruthful things about another citizen, even if he does happen to be your opponent. So it's family values for me, and I like to think an awful lot about parenting, and I think it would be interesting to ask that question of these candidates. How do you feel about parenting? How have you done as a parent? How is your family faring? I think that would give voters a tremendous insight into.
All right. Unfortunately, I have to pull those 30-second rebuttals off the table. We're going to go straight to closings. And Governor Malloy, I believe you go first.
Well, thank you very much for the privilege of being your governor over the last 4 years. We've done a lot of work together, turning this state around. Going from the largest per capita deficit, the largest deficit adjusted for population in the nation, with no money in the rainy day fund, and losing jobs, right and left, to creating over 60,000 private sector jobs while I've been governor, to eliminating that deficit and having surpluses year after year, and to creating jobs at a 3-year streak, the largest we've seen since the 1990s. We have a lot more work to do, and we will do it. We will do it together because that's what we've done over the last 4 years. We all believe in shared sacrifice. We become invested in it. We want our cities to do better even if we don't live in them. We want everyone's school to do better even if our child's not there. We want our streets to be safer even if we're not living on those streets in that neighborhood. This is investment time, and we have done it.
Mr. Foley, you have 1 minute. Closing statement.
The governor's trying to make this choice you have in 3.5 short weeks about me, but in fact, it's about you. Do you want 4 more years of what you have now? A very slow-moving economy, only 1% growth since this governor was elected. Probably the worst economy in the United States of America. Our state losing ground. Or do you want to move forward? Do you want to get behind a leader who has a plan for moving this economy forward, pro-growth economy, lowering people's taxes, supporting job creators, and with a vision for the future? We can get there working together, but you're not going to get there with Governor Malloy.
That's all we have time for. Thank you for watching.
Good to be with you. Yeah. Thank you.